the habit of waiting, of being patient, sometimes is forgotten because we tend to jump to conclusions based on our own cultural experience, our own history. Sometimes observing, listening may help us, okay, this is not what they are meaning. Thinking that the way we think is the norm. We tend to think that we are the yardstick by which humanity is judged. And that if we are reacting to something, well, everybody should be reacting the same way. Otherwise, there's something wrong with them.
Lexigo presents The Native Experience with your host, Brian.
Hello, world. This is Brian from Lexigo.com, and you are listening to the Native Experience Podcast, the show where we continue to get native every time. On this podcast, we go beyond translation and localization and discuss creating truly native experiences for diverse audiences. Today, we're talking with Angelo Barbato, National President of AUSIT, Australian Institute of Interpreters and Translators. We're going to be talking a lot about translation today, and I wanted to let you know that at Lexigo, we work with thousands of brands across the globe to help them communicate with confidence in over 171 languages. So whether you're translating website content, marketing materials, legal documents, or more, Lexigo has the expertise and technology to ensure that your message is communicated effectively and accurately to your global audience. So don't let language barriers and inaccurate translations hold you back from success. Make sure to check out Lexigo for all of your translation and multicultural communication needs and experience that peace of mind that comes with knowing that your message is communicated accurately every single time. All right, let's rock it. A little bit about Angelo today. He is a solicitor practicing part-time in family and immigration law based in Sydney. He is also a legal translator certified by the National Accreditation Authority for Translators and Interpreters in the following combinations. Check this out. English into Spanish, Portuguese into English, French into English, Italian into English, and Spanish into English. Now, Angelo has so many incredible accomplishments. He's done so many things. And in November of 2022, Angelo was elected to the president of the Australian Institute of Translators and Interpreters, which I mentioned AUSIT at the beginning of the show. So I'm very excited for this conversation. We're going to have a lot of really, really good content for you, and I hope you enjoy. Let's rock it. Angelo, welcome to the Native Experience. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, I'm excited to hear all about you. We've got your new role at AUSIT. We'll be talking about that. But I'm excited to get into localization and translation and delivering a native experience. But first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? And also, what do you do for fun?
I am a lawyer and a translator. I pretty much qualified in both areas at the same time, and I prioritized my legal career until COVID. And then I thought I needed a break and put all my efforts in translation. And nowadays I do half and half.
Nice.
For fun, I like cycling and swimming and playing tennis and walking my dog.
Oh, that's great. I'm not quite as good at being a cyclist per se, but I do enjoy getting on the bike and riding as much as possible. But I don't have the stamina that true cyclists have.
Well, I'm not a competitive cyclist, but here I'm in Sydney, Australia. The city is okay for cyclists. It's not the best.
Yeah, I feel like certain cities do a really nice job and others do okay. And then, of course, there's those that there's nothing for bikes. Take your life in your own hands at that point. But I'm glad to hear that at least it's okay. But let me ask you this. On an average bike ride, how many miles do you tend to ride on average?
We use kilometers, and I would say about 10.
10 kilometers, okay.
Is that like 6 miles? 4 miles? I don't know.
I love the translate. I wish we could just all use the same system.
I can translate words much better than measures.
I'd have to look it up, to be honest, because I'm not entirely sure. Love it. Well, I'm glad you get out to do that. Well, thanks for sharing all that. That's awesome. If you could only speak one language for the rest of your life, which one would it be?
That's a tough one because being a translator means having different windows into the world because you look at the world differently through the lenses of different languages. But I suppose it would be English because it would allow me to connect with the largest number of people.
Sure.
English is spoken as a second language by an increasingly growing number of individuals. I mean, it's the lingua franca. I think that would be my answer. Although language is so connected with experiences. And for example, professionally, because I did law school here in Australia. English is activated in that regard. But for everyday things, I prefer Spanish. That's my first language.
Yeah.
But yeah, to answer your question, it would have to be English. Yeah.
Sure. I love what you said at the beginning of your answer, though, that language is like a window into so many different things, and I think that's incredible. Thanks for sharing that. That's good.
I have learned 9 languages. I can work in 5. Every time that learning process, it really makes you think what is important in different cultures or how society works. Do you know, for example, that in Indonesian, there is no word for brother or sister, but there is a word for younger brother or younger sister, and older brother and older sister, because what is important, it is the seniority rather than the gender.
Interesting.
And in other languages, like in Polish, even verbs has gender. So all these things makes you think. They make me think. And so it's like really language. I don't know whether language is a result of logic or the other way around, but it influences reasoning and how we perceive things, because we have to communicate those perceptions through language.
Yeah. You can't just translate the words because of, in different cultures and in different languages, it has different meanings, like you were even talking about with seniority in Indonesian. And so you've learned 9 languages, you work in 5.
Yes.
How do you mentally switch between all of these languages that you speak? How do you do it? Is it quick? How do you manage that?
I think that after the 3rd language you learn, it becomes effortless. When I want to be funny about these things, I say that I am a bodybuilder. Of course, I'm not. I'm not very fit, but I say my brain is a bodybuilder for languages. You can't see it, but it is there.
Oh,
but
it
is true. It is true. It is like the brain is trained to identify patterns, to incorporate that, to pass it from short-term memory to long-term memory. I imagine that this is a process that many other polyglots have experienced. I don't get them confused. Only I get them confused if I'm trying to master them at the same level. For example, when I speak German and Polish at B1. Are you familiar with the levels of the European framework for language assessment? B1 is like intermediate level. I have German and Polish in that level. Sometimes I will get some words confused because they have the same meaning, like alle.
Yep.
Alle means all in German, but means but in Polish. But when there are different levels, for example, French, I speak at C2 level. I don't get that confused with anything.
Interesting.
But,
I love what you said about you're a mental bodybuilder, I guess would be the right way to say it, or a brain bodybuilder. But I like that. I think it's cool. Speaking all these languages, how does that affect your daily life? I mean, when you're communicating, just even in general, because like you said, if you're essentially a mental bodybuilder, you're exercising the brain in ways that many other people don't. So I'm just curious how it affects your daily life.
Yeah, I mean, I have that ability with languages. I don't have that ability in like mental arithmetics, for example.
Sure.
It doesn't affect my life much. I get a lot of enjoyment out of going out and about and understanding people's private conversations when they think there's nobody around who can understand. I read. That's my hobby, as well as I like reading books in their original language. And then it gives me the opportunity to do something to combine my 2 main interests, language and law. So I work a lot as a legal translator. So that is very interesting to convey in a different language.
Each culture and country has, of course, different laws and things that you have to learn and understand as well.
Yes, and it is interesting how we look at the same incident. For example, the passing of property from a parent to a child. That is called succession law. How it happens from place to place, whether there is a will or if there isn't, what the rules are, how much of your property you can really pass on to your heirs or how much by law you have to leave to your children or surviving spouse. It exposes you to a huge range of ways of understanding society.
Yeah.
Because law is the rules that a given society has chosen to be regulated by.
Mm-hmm.
And those choices, some societies put more emphasis on group cohesion and family. Other societies put emphasis on the freedom of the individual to do whatever they want with their property. So, and some concepts, when you are dealing with two very different systems, it is like a jigsaw puzzle, sometimes trying to find the right expression to convey an idea that in one system is very current, but in the other system is not formally in existence.
Yeah, that would be very interesting to learn, those differences and stuff. It's fascinating just seeing all the different cultures in the world too. And you think too, if I'm going to go visit a country, I should know what those laws are. I should know what the customs are, not only so that you don't get in trouble, but also so that you can respect them. But it's hard to do. It's hard to find those things out. But for you to learn all that's impressive. So you mentioned that Spanish was your first language. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So what's your cultural background?
I was born in Uruguay, and I came to Australia when I was 21.
Oh, wow. So you just lived in those two countries then?
In university, I was a student at university here in Australia, and I did an exchange program with France for 1 year. And I studied French law, and I came back to Australia. And then when I finished my studies, I started working here, and I relocated to the UK, and the weather was just too hard. I applied for a scholarship. I got a scholarship to study children's law in Rome, in Italy.
Wow.
So I lived 1 year in Italy.
Yeah.
Then when I finished, I went back to the UK. I worked there for like 10 years. I took a sabbatical and I went and lived in Poland for 1 year in Wrocław. That used to be in German was Breslau. That is like 3 hours from Berlin, but in Poland. No, I like moving around. That's why I prefer being a linguist to a lawyer, because when you're a lawyer, you're mainly tied up to one place.
Sure. Well, that's great. So you get to do the best of both worlds right now, where you're doing half and half. So you get to travel a little bit, hopefully.
Now that COVID is over, I've been to Indonesia once.
Nice.
Because that's the latest language I'm learning. I wanted to learn a non-European language. And I'm enjoying learning Indonesian because the sound system is very similar to Spanish. So I don't have to make contortions with my mouth.
Yeah.
It's not like when I pronounce English, for example, there's so many sounds that Spanish doesn't have. Indonesia is 7-8 hours flight from Sydney. So it's very convenient.
I never thought of it like that, but you're right that Spanish and Indonesian do have a lot of that same sound. So that's, I only know a little bit, like just a couple words here and there, but I thought, oh, okay. Yeah, I'm hearing that now. So that's neat. What country, you've been all over the place now, but if you could only choose one country in the world, where would you live? I mean, it sounds like Australia is kind of where you settled, but is there another country you'd prefer to live in, or would you live where you're at?
I always prefer living where I am at the moment.
I love that. That's a great answer.
Well, yes.
Yeah. Contentment.
Australia is a wonderful place. And there's a lot of multiculturalism. There's lots of opportunities to learn from other people. There is one city in the world that I really like very, very much, and that's Berlin. So in the future, if I have the opportunity to spend a year or two in Berlin and also get my German really, really fluent, I would love to do that.
Nice.
Berlin has so much to see and do, and I just like it very much. Even the winter is a bit harsh, but I suppose that I survived the winter in Poland, so I sort of prepared for prepared for whatever may happen.
Do you have kind of a way that you learn a language? Is there a tip or some kind of a secret trick? Okay, tell me.
Yeah, reading is a tool. Many people put a lot of emphasis on listening. I fix the structures much better when I read.
Okay.
And I find them in And now, I mean, come on, nowadays, it is so easy to learn a foreign language.
Yeah.
I mean, I read books at the moment, I'm reading a book in German. I have it on my iPad, and when I don't know a word, I just touch on the word and the dictionary comes up. It's amazing. I mean, I remember learning English as a kid in the 80s with those cassettes and those books that were not very communicative, was really drilling.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do is I write down, for example, I find a word or a collocation that I don't know. So I have a notebook and I write things down, handwrite them. Because I have read that if you do something mechanical, physical, like handwriting, you are activating other parts of your brain as well. I don't create my glossaries, for example, on the computer. So I have a notebook where I write things, and then from time to time, I go back and read what I've written. And that, especially, I have used it to take my languages from intermediate to advanced level. Because at that stage, the vocabulary is much more precise.
Yeah.
Once you know how the language works, you want to be precise with your ideas. And that's why you need to learn that more sophisticated expressions. The other thing I do is when I go traveling, for example, when I went to Germany the last time, I bought a history high school textbook, but in German. So what a 16-year-old is learning in history, but in German. Why? I already know the context. I know European history.
Mm-hmm.
So because you already have the context, when you are reading that material, you only pay attention to the grammar, to the vocabulary, because more or less you can guess what the meaning is. So you have an advantage there. When you know the topic, the other thing is listening to the news in English first or in Spanish and then in German, because more or less the international news are the same. Once you know what happened in the world and then you listen to that in German, you can concentrate on identifying the new expressions because you know what happened. So they're going to be talking about the same issue, but in German. So that has worked really well for me.
Before you travel to the country, how do you account for pronunciations and, the accents and the dialect?
Depends on the language. Some languages don't have as many variations in pronunciation as English does. Mm-hmm. At the moment, I'm concentrating on Indonesian and in German. In Indonesian, there aren't as many resources available as are for German. So I decided to take a class at a community college. For German, there's so much stuff. There is a Goethe Institute here in Sydney, but I'm not attending the institute at the moment. I am using my textbooks that I have in order to reaffirm the structures. I'm using Duolingo. And I do that every morning. Instead of a morning prayer, I do morning Duolingo.
Yes.
I think for language learning, the main thing, creating a habit every day, doing a little bit.
Yeah.
Because language, you can't cram. You can't. It is like taking things from short-term memory to long-term memory. And for that to happen, you cannot overburden the short-term memory.
Yeah, that's a good point. What was going through my head when I was asking that question was Mandarin. And so I'm thinking, if I look, well, first of all, you've got Chinese characters, and then you've got the English version of the Chinese word. And if you look at it, you go, okay, well, this is what it looks like, but is this how it's pronounced? And then, of course, one word could have 5 different inflections that will create 5 different meanings for that exact same word. And so that's what I was kind of curious about. I know some languages probably it's a lot easier than trying to deal with Mandarin or some of those languages, but where you have to hear the pronunciation.
One day I will tackle a language that uses a different writing system, different script. Korean is of interest to me at the moment.
Yeah.
Also because it has an alphabet. I like very much the sound of Japanese. But the fact that it has syllabaries and the 3 writing systems combined into one, I try to be realistic. I want results that are tangible within a year or 2. Western people who learn Japanese or Chinese, have told me that it takes a fair amount of time. And perhaps when I retire, I'll take up one of those big challenges.
I'm curious about your role at OSIT. I mean, it's relatively new. You've been there, what, six months now? Is that what it is? Right about that?
That's right.
Talk about the role. Talk about what you love about it and what you're hoping to achieve with it.
So this is the Australian Institute of Translators and Interpreters, and it's an association that is been going on for 36 years already. I was elected national president. We are about 2,000 practitioners. In Australia, when you want to be interpreter or translator, you need to pass a certification exam, and that is set by an organization called NAATI. There are around 11,000 people with NAATI credentials in Australia, but only 1/5 are members of the association. So for me, the biggest challenge is to increase the ranks in our association and to persuade people, practitioners, those 9,000 out there, that we have something of value here in our association and that we need them in order to be stronger and to be able to negotiate with government agencies and LSPs, language service providers, who are the translation and interpreting agencies, in order to demand better working conditions.
That's great. Well, congratulations on being elected the president. That's wonderful. And exciting to see what you continue to do and how this goes and how things continue to grow too. So wish you definitely luck on that.
Thank you. Yes. At the moment, we think about the world, the opportunities, language is open for global interactions, but there's something very important as well in interpreting, for instance, in translation, is providing a message that is relevant to the communities that are going to use it. And, there are lots of institutions. If one works in the community sector, for example, translating COVID document or information into Spanish for the Spanish-speaking community here in Australia, that would be expressions that have to do with institutions that work here in Australia, like Centrelink, Medicare, and those expressions may not mean anything or may mean something different in another country, like in the US.
Yeah,
I think the word Medicare exists in the US, but it's something a bit different from Medicare here. So knowing the community you are targeting is very important. And here in Australia, because we have NAATI, that creates a bit of a market. People that work in, a translator in Mexico, it is unlikely to be hired to translate document for the Spanish that people speak in Australia, because that person wouldn't have the context, wouldn't know how Spanish-speaking people, in what environment they live here in Australia. That is one of the characteristics of this market that perhaps is a bit different from other places where the access to the profession is not regulated. In some countries, it is the LSP, the language service provider, that sends you a test to see whether you are up to translating or not. If you want to translate for the communities, for example, if somebody wants to have their will translated into English, somebody from Spain comes and wants to have the will translated into English because they need to lodge it with a notary here in Australia, well, that translation for the notary to accept it will have to bear the seal, the stamp of a certified translator who's been certified by NAATI. It's a guarantee that the person who is doing the translation understands not only the language, but also the context in which the language is used.
Absolutely. Oh, going along the lines of that, do you have a specific story that you could share where you had to overcome, a cultural difference or a challenge, whether it's been in your role as president at OSIT, or whether it is in a legal role or translation role or all of the above? Do you have any specific story you can share?
As president of OSIT and as a lawyer this year, I have been visiting different state capitals. Australia is a federation, so we have different states, and I've been to Tasmania, to South Australia, and talking to lawyers about how to work with interpreters. It is very interesting. And most of these lawyers are monolingual, so they only speak English. It is very interesting to see their reactions to some of the anecdotes I tell them about things that can go wrong by not giving the interpreter context, because sometimes an interpreter is called to court and they're not told for what reason. So they're not being told the story before. It's like when you arrive at the cinema 45 minutes into the film, and you don't have anybody to give you an update as to what's been going on. And then you have to try to make sense just from the images and the sound. You have to try to make sense of the plot of the story. And then you can make wrong assumptions because you don't know what's happened before. So for me, that's been an eye opener that a linguist will take for granted certain things. But for people who are monolingual, we have to educate them to understand why we need them to act in a certain way, why we need them to share certain information so that those mistakes can be avoided, because language communication is context dependent. In these lawyers, obviously, they are always concerned about confidentiality and protecting their clients' positions, especially in criminal cases, but understanding that the interpreter doesn't take sides. The loyalty of the interpreter is to the message, to whatever is being said. And what they want to do is render that accurately as possible. And without coming halfway through the movie without being told what's happened before makes their job almost impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in context, I mean, it's a huge issue even just with personalities. Same language, same country, personality differences. People don't understand each other's contexts. And so communication still doesn't even take place very well. So not only is it important between languages and cultures, but it's also important with sometimes as granular as a person or their upbringing or something like that. When I was in high school, we had foreign exchange students from France, and we were all hanging out and doing stuff. And, when I was in high school, the word putz was a popular word in the US, and it just kind of means like, he's kind of an idiot, a putz. And I kept saying that, and like they had this horrified look on their face, and they said poots, like that's how it translated to them, which in French meant hooker. So we were calling this woman a putz as a joke, and they thought it was a very derogatory thing. And so then, you get the context, you have the conversation, you explain it, then they laughed, but it's good to know that just, okay, what are you saying here? And what's the context and all those little things. So I think it's incredibly important what you're saying right there.
Yes. And in that story, it's like being across purposes. What you mean is one thing, but what the person is understanding is a different one.
Exactly.
That is the problem with the lawyers working more efficiently with interpreters, is that they are not understanding why the interpreters need more material to know the story before, because they're looking at it from their own perspective, which is nothing in relation to the case can go to a third party because that may undermine the outcome for my client.
Yeah.
And what the interpreters are saying is, if you give me the information that I need, I can come prepared to the hearing. Because imagine, I don't know if you know much about agriculture or machinery, but imagine if the case is about somebody who had an accident in a farm because of a malfunction of a tractor. And imagine if you are the interpreter and you've never been in a farm in your life and you don't know the different pieces in a tractor. And the hearing may be between the insurance company and the person who got injured. The interpreter needs to come prepared because they don't have the luxury of a translator that has time to do the lexical research. No, they have to be there ready. If I was in that situation, I mean, I don't have the slightest idea as to how these machines work, or even less about the names of all their little parts. And there's names for everything. There is a name for everything. That's why dictionaries have like 50, 60,000 words.
Yeah.
Whereas an educated person in everyday talk, they use 5,000, 6,000.
Mm.
Everything under the sky has a name. In those cases, when you are dealing with something specific like machinery or even certain activities like criminal activity, there is a slang for everything and it's different from country to country.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's so true.
Like Spanish, they spoken in 20 different countries around the world. Criminal activities, the slang is different from country to country or from region to region. Same as it is in English. Expressions that are used here are quite different to some expressions used in Britain or in the United States. An interpreter needs to have all that knowledge, but in order to come prepared, they need to know what the movie is going to be about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, so true. How should we provide a truly native experience, both personally and professionally? How would you do it? What do you advise us to do?
I would say to observe and listen. The habit of waiting, of being patient, sometimes is forgotten because we tend to jump to conclusions based on our own cultural experience, our own history. Sometimes observing, listening may help us, okay, this is not what they are meaning. Thinking that the way we think is the norm. We tend to think that we are the yardstick by which humanity is judged.
Yeah.
And that if we are reacting to something, well, everybody should be reacting the same way. Otherwise, there's something wrong with them. I think that not having that knee-jerk reaction, but taking a bit of time to check if we are understanding correctly and check whether we are wrong rather than the rest.
Yeah. I love it. I think you're 100% right. And you're right. We jump to conclusions. We hear something and then we stop listening because, we're thinking about we got to defend ourselves. Well, wait, do you really need to defend yourself? Do you understand what they're saying? You're right. I mean, we do. We jump to those conclusions and we hear what we want to hear based on our, like you said, our culture, our history, our upbringing, whatever experiences. And we don't stop and listen and let them finish. I mean, I'm guilty of this. I do it too. And I'm like, hey, I can't judge others either. But also I think we need to be more curious too. Why is this person saying what they're saying? Why is this culture this way? We need to have that curiosity to get to know. People will really be honored if you care about them and are curious about them.
What I suggest is always asking, what do you mean by that? Or in what way? Open-ended questions. Yeah, remember that words are like briefcases.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of emotion or cultural references. So we have to unpack the word. Never take a word at face value, but go behind it. And the way to go behind is by asking open-ended questions. Use a professional interpreter so that you don't have to worry about the language obstacle. You can just leave that to somebody who's committed their life to that profession. Not everybody has a gift for languages. And when you're trying to convey ideas and you don't have the words or the words don't come quickly to your head, that produces stress.
Yeah. This is really, really great information and advice though. So Angelo, I appreciate this. I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today and chatting. I mean, this is really, really good stuff. So thank you so much. Anything else you want to share before we wrap up?
Yes. One last thing, because it just came to my mind.
Yeah.
And the other reason why people should use interpreters is because if you are, for example, if you are an American person who has some Spanish and you're going to Buenos Aires to give a presentation, your pronunciation is not yet very polished. People have to make a lot of effort trying to understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And some people will just disconnect.
True.
So you think that by giving your speech in Spanish, you will be closer to your audience, but actually the result is the opposite.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I love it. All right. Well, thank you. Incredible advice. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time to get on the show and hang out and have a good, really great conversation. Thank you, Angelo. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care.
Angelo Barbato, National President of AISIT, Australian Institute of Interpreters and Translators. Thank you so much for joining us. We're excited the show is launched. We'd love to hear from you. Send us questions and comments, nx@lexigo.com. And remember, always strive for authenticity and embrace the power of native experiences.